Under the soft light from the stained glass windows, David Matthews's big ceremony is about to begin. But what no one expected was that the courage and acumen of his 8-year-old son, Lucas, would completely change the course of this special day. Lucas, a boy with a brave and sensitive heart, stood silently next to his father. While David, dressed in an elegant black tuxedo, smiled happily, Lucas kept a quiet expression and looked worried. The boy tightened his grip on the small pillow with the rings in his hand, his dark eyes looked up at his loving father, his heart seemed to ripple with an indescribable insecurity. When the chapel door opened, Emily appeared in a gorgeous wedding dress. She gracefully walked towards David, each step seemed to glide across the ground, her shiny blonde hair waving with each rhythm. Lucas's eyes still did not leave his father, his heart boiling as he remembered the past months, memories of the afternoon when David excitedly introduced Emily, the special woman he hoped would spend his life together. Suddenly, Lucas stepped forward. He was small but determined, facing a hall full of stunned adults. With a shaky but powerful voice, he revealed a truth that only he knew, a dark secret about Emily. The air seemed to freeze, all eyes turned to him, the person who interrupted the ceremony and stunned everyone. Everyone stood still, the hall filled with shock and amazement at Lucas' brave words. Where will this courageous act lead things? How will the story continue when honesty and protection of loved ones push Lucas to reveal the secret? Lucas remembers feeling his stomach churn, mixed with curiosity and worry, since his mother passed away 2 years ago. From that moment on, only he and his father remained. The thought of another person entering their lives makes Lucas feel insecure. When father and daughter arrived home, Emily was already waiting on the porch. Her blonde hair sparkled in the afternoon light, and her warm smile seemed to dispel some of Lucas's anxiety. Still, he couldn't take his eyes off his father's eyes, shining brightly when he saw Emily. "Lucas, this is Emily," David introduced, his voice filled with pride. "She is very special to me, and I hope she will be special to you too." Emily gently knelt down to Lucas's eye level, her sparkling blue eyes looking at him. "I'm so glad I finally get to meet you, Lucas. Your father always told a lot about you," she said gently. In that moment, Lucas felt a glimmer of hope, maybe things wouldn't be as bad as he thought. However, as the following weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Lucas realizes that Emily is no longer the warm and friendly woman when David is not around. Her cold stares and pursed lips replaced her warm smile. One night, when David had to work late and Emily was assigned to take care of Lucas, he tried to start a conversation. "Miss Emily, today at school we learned about the solar system, I found it very interesting." Emily interrupted immediately, not taking her eyes off the phone. "Lucas, please shut up and eat your dinner," she said coldly. A feeling of stuffiness filled the space, and Lucas could only bow his head, pushing food around his plate, unable to eat anything. Things are completely different when David is present. Emily will show interest in Lucas, laughing happily at the stories he tells and even stroking his hair affectionately. But Lucas could clearly see that the smile was fake. The tension behind her eyes could not be hidden, while David was immersed in happiness. "Emily is amazing, isn't she, Lucas?" David often asked, his eyes sparkling. "We're so lucky to have her in our lives, aren't we?" Lucas just nodded reluctantly, trying to force a smile so as not to ruin his father's joy. But inside, he felt increasingly lonely and lost. Then gradually, Emily began to say sarcastic words when David was not present. "Oh Lucas, why are you so messy?" she said sarcastically when she saw him drop his books. Each of her comments hurt Lucas' self-esteem, causing him to gradually withdraw, spending more time in his room and rarely leaving the house. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding, an incident occurred that Lucas will never forget. David went out to run some errands, leaving Lucas and Emily home alone. While Lucas was watching cartoons in the living room, Emily walked in, turned off the TV, and pointed at the screen. "It's so noisy, I'm trying to work," she said, her eyes serious. Startled, Lucas quickly looked for the remote to turn down the volume, accidentally spilling a glass of juice onto the table and carpet. "Sorry, I didn't mean to," Lucas stammered, jumping up to grab a tissue to wipe it off. But before he could do anything, Emily stood next to him, squeezed his arm and hissed, "Look, what you did. You clumsy thing." Lucas frowned, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll clean it up, I promise." Emily looked at him menacingly. "You better keep this a secret from Dad. Otherwise, you will regret it, understand?" Lucas nodded repeatedly, his heart pounding in his chest. That night, when David came home, Emily greeted him with a sweet smile and a warm hug. Lucas watched from the top of the stairs, gently rubbing his aching arm where Emily had held it tightly, feeling more alone than ever. As the wedding day approaches, Lucas feels heavy because of his secret. He wanted to tell his father about Emily's true face, but fear made him hesitate. What if David doesn't believe? What if Emily gets worse? One night, about a month before the wedding, Lucas worked up the courage to talk to his father. David was sitting in his office reviewing some documents when Lucas hesitantly knocked on the door. "Lucas, do you need something?" David smiled gently when he saw him enter. Lucas took a deep breath, then said what he had hidden in his heart, "Dad, I don't think Emily likes me." David frowned, somewhat confused. "What do you mean, Lucas? Emily admires you very much." "No, Dad. When Dad is not here, she is different. She ignores me and sometimes even says bad things." David sighed, running his hand through Lucas's hair. "Son, this is a big change. I understand you feel uncertain, but she really cares about you. Give her a chance, okay?" Lucas bowed his head, a feeling of defeat overwhelming him. "Yes, Dad," he whispered, then left the room. As he closed the door behind him, Lucas felt a wave of despair wash over him. The person he trusted most in the world didn't believe him, or worse, didn't want to believe. From that day on, Lucas stopped trying to tell his father about Emily's behavior. The boy withdrew into his shell, becoming increasingly silent, cautious, and distant. Lucas began to dread family dinners and outings where he had to pretend everything was fine, even though inside he was enduring Emily's sarcastic words and cold looks. Lucas's father, David, was caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and his own happiness without noticing the change in his son. He thought Lucas was just going through a difficult time, a normal child's impulse, and had no suspicion that some chaos was brewing inside his little one. As for Emily, she seemed to be basking in her sweet victory. The fact that David was unaware of her true colors, and Lucas was too afraid to speak up again, made Emily even bolder and more contemptuous of the boy. One afternoon, while walking through the hallway, Lucas suddenly heard Emily talking to a friend named Sarah on the phone. Sarah said in a doubtful voice, "I don't know how you can handle it, Emily. I just can't handle having to play mother to someone else's child." Lucas stood dumbfounded, holding his breath, listening to Emily's answer. "Oh, that's right, it's not easy at all," Emily replied, her voice filled with fake sweetness. "Lucas, you know, just being part of the package, having to accept both the good and the bad." Sarah laughed loudly. "If it were me, I would have sent him to boarding school a long time ago." Lucas heard every word like a knife stabbing into his heart. He gingerly retreated to his room, no longer feeling hungry, only the pain felt like being punched in the stomach. In Emily's eyes, he was just a nuisance, a burden that she had to accept to achieve a greater goal. As the wedding day approaches, Lucas feels more trapped than ever, as he watches his father and Emily plan their future without considering his feelings. They talked about honeymoon destinations, about redecorating the house, as if Lucas's existence were invisible, insignificant. One night, Lucas lay in bed unable to sleep, the digital clock on his nightstand flashing at 11:42 p.m. The red light cast eerie shadows on the wall, and Lucas decided to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As the boy eased through the hallway in his superhero pajamas, Lucas stiffened. An angry voice rang out from the living room, startling him. "Mark, you have to listen to me," Emily hissed into the phone. Lucas crouched low, looked around the corner, saw Emily pacing back and forth, her other hand pulling at her messy blonde locks. "We can't rush, everything has to be perfect," she continued, her voice alarmingly tense. Lucas's heart was pounding. This was the first time he saw Emily no longer maintain her usual sweetness, especially when her father was around. "The wedding is in 2 weeks," Emily whispered, her voice filled with calculation. "Once everything is done, we will move on to phase 2. David's insurance policy will have no defects at all." Lucas's world seemed to be turned upside down. His eyes opened wide, confusion and fear filled him. He knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but Emily's every word seemed to bind him. That conversation, the one he could never forget, made Lucas realize, he had to do something, before it was too late. Luxa sat silently in the corner of the room, her eyes bright but filled with anxiety. He knew that something wrong was going on. When he heard the words of Emily, his soon-to-be stepmother, he felt like there was something hiding behind the fake smile she gave to David, his beloved father. But Luxa didn't know what to do, she just knew that she couldn't sit still and wait for things to happen. "What does Emily mean by that?" Luxa asked, his voice choked with fear. Emily was talking about a plan, but he couldn't understand it clearly. She talked about his father's money in some insurance policy, which Luxa was unaware of. He realized he had to do something immediately. But while he was still trying to think about everything, Emily spoke again, her voice was cold but full of confidence. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it all. Just be a little patient, and David will never know about this." Tears couldn't stop falling from Luxa's eyes. He knew clearly that Emily didn't like him, but when he heard her talk about his father like that, he felt a tearing pain in his heart. "We just need a little more time, then everything will be fine," Emily said calmly, as if everything had been carefully planned. "In 2 weeks, everything will be done." Luxa left the room in a hurry, his heart in turmoil. He couldn't understand what Emily's plan was, but he was sure that his father was in danger. That night, Luxa couldn't sleep. Emily's words kept repeating in his head, like a nightmare he couldn't escape from. The next morning, he walked down to the dining table, where his father, David, and Emily were sitting and talking happily. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling, but Luxa saw something cold behind that smile. He felt like he was frozen when he met Emily's eyes. But he tried to force a smile, not wanting to reveal his inner anxiety. David happily laughed and stroked Luxa's hair. "Why do you look so tired, Luxa? Didn't you sleep last night?" Luxa just nodded, avoiding Emily's eyes. But in his heart, anxiety increased. He knew that something was very wrong going on, but he couldn't say it. He couldn't believe that his father hadn't noticed the obvious signs. "I guess I'm just tired," Luxa muttered, trying to force a smile, but unable to erase the fear in her heart. In the following days, he realized more and more strange things about Emily. She always sits and texts secretly, not even bothering to hide when someone comes into the room. He saw the name Marky appearing in Emily's phone contacts, and her absences were longer than usual. All of this made Luxa feel like something was wrong, and he knew he had to act before it was too late. A week before the wedding, when Luxa was helping David in the garage, he saw Emily's car rushing into the yard. She hurried in without paying attention to him or David. Luxa felt confused, but still had to do as her father said. "Do you want to go get a snack?" David asked while fixing the lawnmower. Luxa was silent, looked at Emily's car and then entered the house. He heard Emily's voice from upstairs, whispering something to someone. "I won't regret it, Mark," Emily said, her voice cold, "when we get married, everything will be easy. A sudden accident, a grieving widow, and we will have it all." Luxa stood rooted to the spot. A cold chill ran down his spine. Sudden accident? He wondered, so what will they do with my father? He couldn't believe what he just heard. They are planning to hurt David, and possibly the person he loves the most. At that moment, Luxa felt like the atmosphere in the room became heavier than ever. He had to do something, but who would believe him when everything was so carefully planned? Even with the warning, will his father believe his words? Luxa felt helpless, but couldn't give up. He is determined to protect his father, even if he has to face a big plan that Emily and Mark are planning. She is very careful, but sometimes, for some reason, becomes negligent. One evening, Lucas walked into his father's office and saw Emily hastily closing David's laptop. She was startled when she saw Lucas, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. "Oh, Lucas," she said, her voice suddenly brightening, "you startled me. I was just checking some responses for the wedding." Lucas nodded, his expression showing no doubt. But as soon as Emily left the room, Lucas approached his father's laptop. It was locked, but Lucas knew his dad's password was his birthday. Even though the browser history was wiped clean, there was still a tab open, leading to the website of a major life insurance company. Lucas's stomach turned. This must have been the insurance policy that Emily was referring to when he was trying to find out about her. He was about to learn more when he suddenly heard footsteps. Hastily, he closed the laptop and pretended to look at the bookshelf. David smiled and walked in. "Lucas, what are you doing?" he asked. "Have you found any books yet?" Lucas, even though he was confused, still tried to act calm and replied, "Yes, just looking for a book." David patted his head affectionately, then said, "You're always like that, always focused on your books. Dinner is ready, let's go eat." As he entered the dining room, Lucas' mind was still racing. He had to find a way to stop Emily, but the next day, his chance arrived. When they met at work, Emily went out to do one of her secret jobs. Lucas remained alone in the house, his hands shaking as he opened Emily's silver sleek laptop. It's also password protected, of course. Lucas tried a few times, guessing her birthday, then her and David's wedding date, but to no avail. When he was about to give up, a yellow sticky note stuck out from under the computer. He carefully peeled it off and saw a string of numbers and letters. His heart beat strongly. Is this the key code? With a sigh, Lucas typed in the code and Emily's computer screen immediately opened. He couldn't believe his eyes as he scrolled down. In Emily's files, there are dozens of documents with very suspicious names. He clicked on a labeled insurance policy, and a PDF opened. In it, there were legal terms that Lucas could not understand, but there were a few phrases that immediately caught his attention: accidental death, double compensation, $5 million. $5 million. That was the value of his father's life. Lucas's hands shook as he continued searching. He found a folder labeled Mark and opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of a man he had never met. The man was tall, had black hair, with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos, this man is alone, in other photos, he is with Emily, and they look like a couple. A feeling of disgust rose in Lucas. Not only did Emily intend to harm his father, she also betrayed him. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a car rushing into the yard. Emily is back. Lucas hastily closed all the windows on the computer and turned it off, trying to leave things looking as they did before he found them. The front door opened, and Emily walked in. "Lucas, there you are," she called Lucas' name. "Vang," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. Emily stood in the doorway, looking suspiciously around the room. She looked at Lucas for a long moment, her expression filled with disbelief. Then she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Dinner is almost done," she said and turned to leave. In that moment, Lucas caught a glimpse of Emily's phone screen. She is texting someone. And the contact name is simply M. That night, as he lay in bed, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about all he had just discovered. Emily and Mark are planning to kill his father to get the insurance money. They will wait until after the wedding, then create some accident so they can receive huge amounts of money. Lucas felt stunned, because he was just a child. Will he have the courage to stop this evil plan? The wedding is only a few days away, and Lucas doesn't know if his father believes what he found out. That day, the dawn light was not enough to dispel Lucas's nightmares last night. He woke up, drenched in sweat, his mind still confused by what he witnessed in the dream. It seems everything is not over yet. Lucas knows that today is the big day. The day his father, David Matthews, will marry Emily. But something is wrong. The feeling in his heart was unpleasant, as if something bad was about to happen. Over the past several months, Lucas had sensed a change in Emily's demeanor. She's not who your father thought she was. She always acts sweet, but Lucas sees the hypocrisy in her actions. Emily's sweet words and kind gestures all seem to be just an outer shell, covering up a deep secret. And in last night's dream, everything was clear. Emily and a man named Mark were standing by the grave of Lucas's late father, laughing and talking in a photo he saw. With a heavy heart, Lucas decided he could not stand still and watch this wedding take place. You have to do something to stop it, no matter what you face. You must protect your father, at all costs. That was Lucas's final decision. When he entered the church, the air became choking. A crowd of guests surrounded him, curious eyes following every move. He felt like he was standing on the brink of an irreversible change. The master's announcement rang out, preparations for the ceremony to begin. Lucas stood there, unable to concentrate on what was going on. He just felt a panic rising in his chest. You have to say something, you have to act now, otherwise it will be too late. Lucas' heart pounded in his chest. At this point, he only has one choice: tell the truth before it's too late. Lucas gasped, his voice small but determined. All eyes immediately turned to him, standing in the middle of the ceremony, his hands shaking but full of determination. David turned to look at Lucas, his eyes filled with worry and confusion. "What's the matter, son?" he asked, his voice shaking. He looked at his father, then at Emily, who was standing there, looking both shocked and angry. Lucas couldn't stay silent anymore, he had to say what he knew. "Dad, I can't let her marry you," Lucas exclaimed, his voice choking. "She's not who you think she is. She's cheating on you." Emily glanced at Lucas, trying to keep her composure, but the tension could be clearly seen in her every move. "Honey," she said, her voice so sweet it was fake, "you might feel scared about having a new mom. But there's nothing wrong with that, don't worry too much." Lucas couldn't stand that pretense anymore. He shouted, "No, I heard you talking to someone named Mark. She's planning to hurt Dad." The whole church was immersed in silence. The guests looked at each other, whispering, surprise and worry evident on their faces. David stared at Lucas, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Where did you hear this?" "Lucas, are you sure about what you said?" he asked, his voice serious. Lucas nodded vigorously, tears falling down his face. "I'm not lying, Dad. I heard her talking to Mark about money, about the insurance policy. I know what they want to do with Dad, after they get married." Emily, no longer able to maintain her calm expression, burst out laughing awkwardly. "It's just an insurance policy for the wedding, and money for the services. Nothing bad, Lucas." But Lucas didn't believe it, and he didn't back down. "I saw the insurance policy on her computer. It's worth millions of dollars, and if Dad dies, it will all go to her and Mark. I even found pictures of them together. They're planning something really bad," Lucas said. Every word he said was like a knife stabbing into his father's heart. The tension in this space is increasing day by day. David looked from Lucas to Emily, feeling like everything was falling apart around him. "Emily, impatient, shouted, "I'm just a child. I don't understand what I'm saying." David stood there, his eyes hardened, his face pale. "Son, you are taking this very seriously. Are you sure of what you saw and heard?" Lucas nodded again, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I'm sure. I won't lie. Emily has treated me very badly all this time. But when her father is not there, she shows her true nature. I can't let her hurt you, Dad. I have to stop this wedding, because I love you, Dad." The whole church was silent, the truth was revealed. Emily, the woman David trusted, was exposed by Lucas. That 8-year-old boy, even though he was young, proved that a child's love and care can be stronger and more decisive than anything. David Matthews' face was like a storm of emotions right now, confused, hurt, unbelievable. He turned to Emily, his voice low and tense, full of pain. "Emily, is there any truth to this?" Emily's composure seemed to wear her down. Her eyes roamed around the church, observing the shocked faces of the guests, the stern looks from the moderator. Lucas's pleading eyes. For a moment, she felt like a cornered animal. But in just a blink of an eye, Emily's demeanor changed, her eyes hardened, her mouth became fierce. She smirked, her voice sharp, "This is ridiculous. I don't need to stand here and be blamed by a spoiled brat who can't share his dad's attention." She turned to the stunned crowd, her expression showing no shame. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this outburst from Lucas. Some issues we need to address as a family. David, maybe we should postpone the ceremony." But David couldn't let things drag on any longer. He interrupted, his voice quiet but determined, "No, Emily. I think we need to solve this problem now. Because if there is even an iota of truth in what Lucas said," Emily's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you going to believe an 8-year-old's wild fantasies about me, your fiancée, the woman you love?" David's face became tense. "I've heard enough. Emily, I love my son too. Lucas has never lied to me. He's not the type to make up stories, especially things like this." Lucas was relieved that his father was on his side, but Emily wasn't stopping yet. She cried, her voice filled with anger, "I do nothing but love you, David. I will try to be Lucas's mother, and this is how I will be rewarded, with baseless accusations and suspicion." She turned to Lucas, her eyes glowing. In that moment, she lost control and hissed, "Kid, you ruined everything." A gasp went up from the audience, but David's eyes widened in shock when he saw Emily's outburst. He had never seen her like that. That made him cold. "Emily," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" Emily suddenly realized her mistake. She backed away quickly and tried to laugh. "Oh David, don't you see this tension? That's just too much. Lucas's outburst, these ridiculous accusations. I just lost my temper for a moment. Sure you can understand, but the damage has already been done." David took a step back, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. He said slowly and firmly, "No, I don't think I can understand. Because of Emily I think I knew I would never speak to my son that way, no matter how frustrating it was." He turned to Lucas, kneeling down to look into his son's eyes. "Lucas, tell me everything from the beginning, don't hide anything." Lucas begins talking about Emily's cold behavior when they are alone. He talked about cruel comments, physical threats, phone conversations he overheard, her suspicious absences, secret messages sent. Lucas tells about the insurance search and the photos Emily took with Mark. David's face grew paler and paler, while the guests listened in silence, shock and disbelief. Some people shook their heads, in disbelief, while others began nodding, as if the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Emily stood motionless, looking back and forth between David and the exit. As Lucas's story unfolds, her calm exterior crumbles completely. She looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. David looked into Emily's eyes, his voice painful. Is this true, Emily? Emily opened her mouth, but not a word came out. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, were now filled with cold calculation. At that moment, David felt the truth crumbling, his heart was broken. He said softly, "This marriage is over." Immediately, a commotion broke out in the church. Guests began to stand up, some moving towards the exit, while others gathered, buzzing over what had just happened. Emily sees her chance. She growled in frustration, turned and stormed down the aisle. The white dress billowed up behind her. The guests were in shock, but Emily didn't stop. She passed them, rushing towards the door. Someone shouted, but Emily quickly rushed out into the bright sunlight. Leaving behind a chaotic scene, the church seemed to crumble in chaos. David, stunned, pulled out his phone, hands shaking, and called 911. "Hello, I need to report a crime. My fiancée, she was going to kill me for the insurance money. She just ran away from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." Lucas stood motionless, overwhelmed by the events taking place. A mixture of relief and worry coiled in his stomach. He saved his father, but at the cost of the guests who had to witness this storm. David ended the call and turned back to his son. He knelt down, put his hand on Lucas' shoulder, his voice choked. "Sorry son, I should have listened to you sooner." Lucas wrapped his arms around his father's neck, buried his face in David's shoulder, his voice muffled. "It's okay, Dad. I'm just glad I'm safe." David hugged his son tightly, tears welling up for a moment. The chaos around them gradually faded, leaving only father and son, weathering the storm together. While they were still in each other's arms, the moment was interrupted by the appearance of two police officers. They entered the church, attracting immediate attention. The murmur of voices subsided as everyone turned to look. Officer Johnson and Officer Rivera approached David and Lucas. One of them asked to speak to David. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." David stood up, put his hand on Lucas' shoulder, and began to tell the officers everything. But at this moment, Lucas's attention was attracted by a commotion near the door. A tall man, with black hair and a scar on his left eyebrow, was squeezing inside. Lucas immediately recognized this person. It was Mark, the guy he'd seen in the pictures on Emily's computer. "Dad, it's him, it's Mark," Lucas whispered. David raised his head to follow Lucas's gaze. He recognized and remembered his son's description. "That's Mark." Officers responded quickly. Officer Johnson stayed with David and Lucas, while Officer Rivera quickly advanced toward Mark, who was now trying to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Rivera called, causing Mark to freeze for a split second. His eyes darted around like a cornered animal, then in a panic he turned and ran. Officer Rivera immediately ordered chase over the radio, requesting backup. Wedding guests silently watched in stunned silence as the police officer disappeared through the church door, chasing the mysterious man. "Mr. Matthews," Officer Johnson said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I think it would be best for you and your son to come down to the wedding. The station will need to gather all the evidence you have about the plan." "Emily's plan?" David nodded, still looking shocked. "Of course, whatever you guys need." "Lucas, are you okay with coming with us to the police station?" David asked, looking at his son. Lucas nodded bravely, even though his heart was racing. "Yes, Dad, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, David's best man, Jack, approached. He placed a comforting hand on David's shoulder. "What do you want us to do about all this?" Jack asked, gesturing vaguely towards the church, which was full of confused and worried guests. David stroked his hair, looking stunned. I don't know, Jack. I guess tell everyone to go home. Sorry for me. I can't deal with this right now." Jack nodded, showing understanding. Don't worry about it, buddy. I'll take care of everything here. Just focus on you and Lucas. David tried to smile weakly, thanking Jack. I don't know what I would do without you. As David and Lucas left the church with Officer Johnson, they could hear Jack speaking to the crowd, speaking in a steady, reassuring voice as he explained the situation and asked everyone to go home. The trip to the police station was strange. Lucas sat in the back of the police car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown pass by in a blur. Everything looks the same, but somehow, everything has changed. His father sat beside him, uncharacteristically silent, his eyes unfocused as he looked out the window. David and Lucas were led to a small, simple room, with a table and a few chairs. Officer Johnson assured them that this was not an interrogation room but a quiet place where they could talk without interruption. Over the next few hours, David and Lucas recounted their experiences with Emily. Lucas describes the phone conversations he overheard, Emily's cruel treatment when David was around, and his discovery of the insurance policy and photos on her computer. David is still in shock, filling in the blanks with details about his relationship with Emily, trying to pinpoint exactly when everything went wrong. As they talk about what happened, the puzzle is gradually solved. Emily asked for an increase in David's life insurance policy just a month after they got engaged, citing concerns about Lucas' future if something happened to David. She also urged them to take up adventurous hobbies like rock climbing, skydiving, and even swimming with sharks on their honeymoon. I think she just likes adventure, David said, his voice hollow. I never imagined. Lucas reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. David tried to smile slightly, thanking his son for his steadfast support. As more and more information was revealed, Officer Rivera captured Mark a few blocks away from the church for questioning. He quickly revealed the entire plan he and Emily had made. Emily, which turns out not to be her real name, is actually Sarah Connor, a con artist with a long history of seducing wealthy men and then disappearing with their money. Mark is her longtime partner, both in crime and in real life. They have been running scams for years, but the plan for David is the most ambitious and dangerous of all. The insurance policy Lucas discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily, or Sarah, had suddenly and systematically isolated David from his friends and family, manipulating him into changing his mind about leaving everything to her. Their plan is to stage an accident on their honeymoon to steal David's insurance money and assets, then disappear and start a new life. When things became clearer, David seemed to collapse. How could I be so blind? He whispered to himself, more than to Lucas or the officers. How come I don't see what's going on? Officer Johnson, who was quietly taking notes, looked up with sympathy. Mr. Matthews, don't blame yourself. These people are experts, they've done this before and are very good at manipulating others. The important thing is that they didn't succeed because of Lucas. David looked at Lucas with pride and guilt. You're right, he said softly, Lucas saved my life today. I just wish I had listened to you sooner. Lucas felt a surge of love for his father. He leaned against David's side. It's okay, Dad. You and I are fine now. David Matthews, a loving father, sat with a sigh, looking far away at the opposite wall. A heavy sense of guilt weighed on his mind for not listening to his son. He realized how Emily, the woman he was about to marry, treated his son Lucas. And he felt pain when he realized that it was he who brought her into their lives, creating unnecessary dangers. Lucas sat silently for a moment, contemplating what his father had just said. Finally, he spoke, with wisdom that could not be hidden, but also full of love and forgiveness. Dad, I just want us to be happy. You never know what Emily is really like. I'm just trying to make things better, Lucas said in a low voice, but his eyes were filled with worry. David Matthews looked into Lucas's eyes, his eyes filled with tears. I should have seen how she affected you. I should have realized that you were unhappy, David said chokingly, tears welling up in his eyes. Lucas reached out and gently held his father's hand. "I don't want to ruin your happiness, Dad. If you're truly happy with her, I'll be happy for you," Lucas said softly. David Matthews pulled Lucas into a tight hug, as if wanting to give his son everything he had. "Never, Lucas. The child is not the problem. Children are the most wonderful thing in my life." "I'm sorry if I made you doubt that," David said, his voice choking. Father and son sat there, hugging each other for a long time, letting their tears flow freely. It was a moment of catharsis, erasing all the pain and fear of the past months. Finally, David wiped away his tears, looked at Lucas and said quietly, "Let's go inside and order a bunch of pizza. I think we deserve it." Lucas tried to smile, his eyes sparkling with joy. "Can we get pizza with crust, Dad?" he asked with interest. David chuckled, his voice a little watery, but sincere. "You can eat any pizza you want today, Lucas," he replied. As they entered the house, both David and Lucas felt a weight lifted from their shoulders. Emily's ghosts still loom somewhere, but they know that, no matter what, they will face them together. They were home, they were safe, and most importantly, they had each other. In the weeks that follow, David and Lucas' lives are thrown into disarray as they face the consequences of Emily's deception. The police come for interviews, lawyers constantly meet to resolve the legal problems Emily left behind, and their lives are filled with endless calls from family, friends, and even reporters looking for them. Information about the case. David and Emily's wedding drama unravels, but David still tries his best to protect Lucas from the worst. Even though Emily is gone, it's not over yet. Police continued to investigate, and David received updates on the search for her. However, hope of finding her gradually faded over time. Meanwhile, through a plea agreement, one of Emily's associates provided information about an elaborate, years-long criminal network that left behind broken hearts and empty bank accounts. Empty all over the country. The aftermath of the wedding day is not simply relief but also endless anxiety. Lucas feels glad that his father is safe, but he can't shake the fear that Emily will one day return to take revenge. David noticed insecurity in his son. He grabbed Lucas's hand and said, "Dad installed a new security system in the house. We have cameras and motion sensors, you can rest assured. If you feel worried about anything, no matter how small, just come find me. We're a team, okay?" Lucas nodded, feeling a little more reassured that his father was always there to reassure him. "Thank you, Dad," Lucas whispered. As time passed, their lives gradually returned to normal, although there were still wounds that had not fully healed. But David and Lucas know that, no matter what difficulties they face, they can overcome them all together. David Matthews threw himself into work, trying to fill his time with additional projects to keep his mind from returning to painful memories. As for 8-year-old Lucas, he focuses his energy on school, hoping to find some peace in his daily routine, from class to homework, all of which help him escape from his difficult reality. One Saturday morning, about a month after their failed wedding, David and Lucas were sitting together at the breakfast table when the doorbell rang. David was immediately alert, frowning slightly, worried about who would pay a surprise visit. He looked through the peephole, and breathed a sigh of relief when he recognized Jack, his best man and best friend. When opening the door, Jack smiled brightly, mixed with a bit of a joke, "Are you two waiting for me?" David tried to respond with a smile, but there was still a tired look in his eyes. "Yes, we're still here, just hanging around." Jack walked in and followed David into the kitchen, where Lucas was finishing his bowl of cereal. Jack bent down and lightly punched Lucas on the shoulder. "Hey, little guy. Are you okay?" Lucas smiled, responding to the light punch with a sympathetic nod. He always loved Jack, the only person who treated him like a real adult, not just a child. Jack took the cup of coffee from David, sat down and looked at both of them with serious eyes. "Actually, I came here for a reason. The boys and I discussed it, and thought it was time for father and son to go out and get some fresh air. What do you guys think about a camping trip next weekend? David looked at Lucas, then looked back at Jack, still wondering. I don't know, Jack. After everything that happened. Jack insisted, that's why you two need this trip. He looked at David with sympathetic eyes. Just a few days, to get away from it all, no phones, no reporters, no lawyers. Just nature, tents, and outdoor adventures. When Lucas heard this, his eyes lit up and he quickly asked, can we go fishing, Uncle Jack? His excited eyes made David feel a strange warmth creep into his heart. Jack laughed, of course, boy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army. David looked into Lucas's hopeful eyes, and he finally felt a peace in his heart. Perhaps this is exactly what father and daughter needed, a chance to take a deep breath, and remember the simple joys of life before Emily entered their world. He smiled and nodded, okay, I agree. We're going camping. That weekend camping trip turned out to be the best thing for David and Lucas. In the peace of nature, they gradually forget the hurt of betrayal and painful memories. They spent the day walking, fishing, and sharing stories around the campfire. Lucas happily learned how to pitch a tent and roast marshmallows, and David felt the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without any worries. The last night in the forest, as the two sat around the burning embers, David pulled Lucas close and softly said, "Thank you, Lucas." Lucas looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Dad?" David smiled, his eyes shining in the sparkling light of the embers, "Because you were brave when I couldn't. Because you saved both of us." Lucas snuggled close to his father, feeling deep peace and love. "We saved each other, Dad," he whispered. In that moment, in the quiet night, they found peace again, and began to write a new journey, stronger, more resilient, and more loving to each other than ever. The next day, as they drove home, both David and Lucas felt a breath of fresh air in their hearts. Emily's shadow still lingered behind, but no longer made them afraid or tired. After the storm, they realized they were stronger and more resilient in the face of life's challenges. Lucas begins to return to school, adapting to new lessons and making new friends. David, under the guidance of his therapist, began to slowly open up, cautiously entering the world of dating again. His slow but steady steps clearly show the great change in his soul. 6 months after Emily's unfinished wedding, on a chilly autumn afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Officer Johnson stood there, his face stern. "Mr. Matthews, I have news about Emily," he said when David invited him into the house. David's heart was beating rapidly. "Have you arrested her yet?" Officer Johnson shook his head slightly. "No, we found her body in a motel room near Vegas. It seems she took her own life." Those words were like a strong blow. David staggered back, leaned against the wall, whispering, "Did she pass away?" Lucas was walking down the stairs, saw his father and the police officer, and stopped. "This has to do with Emily, right, Dad?" David looked at his son, his face pale, then invited him to sit down next to him so they could both face the truth. Officer Johnson gently tells about Emily, or her real name Sarah, who ran away, enduring the pressure until she couldn't live with her regrets anymore. David quietly hugged Lucas, musing, "Life is very complicated, honey. Sometimes people make mistakes, but the important thing is that we learn from them and continue moving forward." The news of Emily's death not only closed a painful chapter but also marked a turning point for father and daughter. David and Lucas worked together to overcome their pain, attend counseling sessions, and strengthen their increasingly close relationship. Over time, life gradually stabilized. David learns to be the best father he can be, enjoying every moment with his son. Lucas is also happier and more confident at school, finds a passion for detective books and always likes to joke that he will be a mystery solver in the future. On the 1-year anniversary of the unfinished event, David and Lucas decided to start a new tradition. They go on picnics together, explore forests and lakes and enjoy the peace of nature. As they sat by crystal clear lake, watching the brilliant sunset, David turned to look at his son. You know, Luxa, thanks to what happened, I realized the most important thing in life. Lucas looked at his father curiously. David smiled and gently patted his son's shoulder. The most precious thing about me is this relationship, you and me. We will always be a team. Lucas smiled brightly and hugged his father tightly. I love you very much, you know. On the way home, the sunset gradually fell, but their hearts were filled with the light of family love. Through all the storms and challenges, they have become stronger, more connected people. There is no need for a fairy tale wedding. The true love between father and son is the happiest and most lasting ending. The story of David and Lucas is a testament to resilient love and courage, a reminder that in life, sincere love is what will always help us overcome every storm. Please remember to register for more touching and inspiring stories, and before you go, we'd love to hear from you. How do you think you would handle the situation if you were in Lucas' position? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you.